Lena had been sitting by the window for what felt like hours, the quiet hum of the evening wrapping around her like a soft blanket, the golden glow from the streetlights spilling across the living room floor and painting patterns on the walls. But despite the calmness of the night, she felt a restless flutter in her chest, a subtle unease she couldn't quite name, a tension that made her glance at the clock again, noting how late it had grown, and she wondered if it was the weight of the week pressing down on her, the endless errands, the small disappointments, or perhaps something deeper, something that had been simmering silently beneath her careful composure. For as much as she told herself she was fine, she knew there was a longing in her heart, a desire for connection and understanding that went beyond polite conversations and polite smiles. And just as she leaned back into the soft cushions of the armchair, letting herself sink into the quiet and try to find a measure of peace, the soft creak of the door startled her, a sound that made her pulse quicken in a way that was both alarming and oddly thrilling, because it wasn't common for anyone to enter her room unannounced, and when she turned her gaze, her eyes met the hesitant figure of Ethan, her stepson, standing awkwardly in the doorway, his shoulders slightly hunched, his hands nervously fidgeting, and she realized instantly that this wasn't just a casual visit, there was something weighing on him, something that had pushed him past the usual boundaries, and she felt a pang of concern mixed with a strange, confusing flutter of emotions she wasn't entirely ready to name, emotions that made her stomach tighten and her heart beat faster than it should, and yet, she forced a calm smile, the kind of smile that reassured without revealing too much, the kind of smile that invited without pushing, and said softly, almost instinctively, "Of course, you can come in," and as he stepped across the threshold, each careful movement of his body seemed to magnify the tension in the room, the quiet air thick with unspoken words, as if both of them were holding their breath, not knowing exactly how to start, not knowing what could be said without shifting the fragile balance of emotions that had suddenly sprung between them. And as he finally settled into the chair across from her, the small distance between them seemed vast yet intimate at the same time, a paradox that neither of them could ignore, the faint rustle of clothing and the soft sighs in the quiet room creating an almost tangible rhythm that matched the racing of Lena's own heart, and she watched him, really watched him, noticing the subtle change in his expression, the way his eyes flickered with uncertainty, the way his jaw tightened as if holding back thoughts too complicated or too heavy to voice, and she felt a surge of empathy, a desire to reach out, to comfort, to bridge the gap with words or with the simple touch of a hand, yet she also felt the strange, unfamiliar tug of something more, a warmth that spread across her chest and made the air feel charged, a connection she knew she shouldn't fully understand yet couldn't deny. And when Ethan finally cleared his throat, his voice barely above a whisper, asking if it was really okay for him to be there, she realized how small he seemed in that moment, how vulnerable, and how the room, the evening, the quiet glow of the lights had suddenly transformed into a space of raw honesty and unspoken truths. And when she nodded, her hand brushing the edge of the armchair as she invited him closer, the simple gesture carried more weight than either of them expected, the kind of weight that makes time seem slower, that stretches seconds into eternities. And as he took a hesitant step forward, settling into the chair, their eyes met in a long, lingering gaze that said more than words ever could, a gaze full of confusion, longing, vulnerability, and a strange, unacknowledged pull that neither could name yet both felt intensely, and the room seemed to shrink around them, the quiet punctuated only by the soft sound of the clock ticking and the faint hum of the night outside, and Lena's thoughts raced, torn between propriety, concern, and the sudden awareness of a powerful emotional connection that had formed in an instant, a connection that made her pulse quicken, her breath catch, and yet made her mind swirl with questions about what it meant, how it should be handled, and what was happening in the quiet corners of their hearts. And when Ethan finally looked down, his fingers twisting together nervously, she realized that he was as overwhelmed as she was, carrying feelings that were complex and tender, emotions that were new, confusing, and undeniably intense. And in that quiet, charged space, Lena felt a mix of fear and excitement, the thrill of an unexpected emotional closeness that had arrived unannounced, just like him, a moment that would linger in her memory long after the night had ended, a moment that was both beautiful and dangerous in its intensity, a moment that set the stage for something profound, something neither of them could ignore. And as they both sat there, breathing softly, letting the silence stretch between them, there was a sense of anticipation, An unspoken promise that this night was only the beginning of a story neither could have predicted, a story that would challenge their hearts, their understanding, and their very sense of what connection meant, for in that quiet, dimly lit room, with the night outside casting shadows and light across the walls, Lena and Ethan shared an unplanned intimacy, a moment of emotional exposure that was tender, fragile, and transformative, a moment that would mark the start of something neither of them fully understood yet, a moment that would linger, haunting and exhilarating, long after the door closed and the world outside resumed its ordinary rhythm, a moment that neither would ever forget because it was the first time they truly saw each other, not just as stepmother and stepson, but as human beings craving understanding, closeness, and a connection that felt impossible to articulate but impossible to ignore. And as the night deepened and the city outside carried on in its quiet routine, Lena felt a stirring in her heart, a mixture of fear, longing, and hope, and Ethan, across from her, felt the same, the weight of unspoken feelings pressing gently, insistently, a reminder that sometimes, the most significant moments in life arrive quietly, unexpectedly, and change everything in ways you can never predict. And as they both sat there, lost in thought, the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next word, the next gesture, the next small movement that would either bridge the gap or deepen the mystery, and Lena realized, with a thrill she could barely name, that nothing would ever be the same again after this night, that the quiet, unexpected visit had planted a seed, fragile yet powerful, that promised a story of emotions, desires, and discoveries that neither of them were prepared for, yet both secretly longed to explore. And in the glow of the lamp, with the shadows dancing softly on the walls, Lena and Ethan shared a silent understanding, a moment that was delicate, electric, and unforgettable, a moment that set everything in motion, the first chapter of a journey that would challenge their hearts, awaken their feelings, and leave an indelible mark on both of them, all beginning with a simple, quiet evening that neither of them expected, a visit that would ripple through their lives, quietly, profoundly, and forever. Ethan's presence in the room that evening felt heavier than Lena expected, not just physically, but emotionally, as if the air itself had thickened around them, charged with tension and anticipation that neither dared to name aloud, and as he settled into the chair opposite her, the soft creak of the cushions under him echoed through the quiet room, punctuating the silence with a subtle rhythm that matched the rapid beating of Lena's heart, her eyes tracing the lines of his face. Noticing the way his eyebrows drew together, the slight downturn of his lips, the flicker of uncertainty and vulnerability in his gaze, and she felt a sudden urge to reach out, to offer comfort, to bridge the invisible gap that had formed between them in the weeks and months prior when they had shared little more than polite greetings and casual conversation. And yet now, in this suspended moment, something had shifted, something delicate but undeniable, and she could sense it as clearly as the fading glow of the streetlights that filtered through the curtains, painting soft streaks of gold across Ethan's features, highlighting the tension in his jaw and the subtle tremor in his fingers as he clasped them together nervously. And when he finally spoke, his voice low and hesitant, almost breaking under the weight of unspoken emotions, he admitted that he had been feeling invisible lately, unheard, and unrecognized, that life had suddenly felt heavier than he could manage alone. And as Lena listened, her chest tightened with empathy, a mix of sorrow for his struggles and an inexplicable warmth that radiated from the core of her being, making her pulse quicken as she realized just how deeply connected she already felt to him. A bond that went beyond the labels of stepmother and stepson, something raw and human, something that resonated with her own hidden fears and secret longings, and without thinking, she reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from his forehead, the gesture tender and almost instinctive, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver through them both, a silent acknowledgement of the emotions they were carefully navigating. And Ethan's eyes met hers, wide, searching, filled with a combination of surprise, longing, and confusion, and in that instant, words became unnecessary, for the moment spoke volumes, carrying the weight of feelings they had yet to name, and Lena found herself wondering how something so simple, so fleeting, could feel so profound. How a single touch could ignite a storm of emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel, a storm that made her aware of the fragile tension between desire, propriety, and human connection, and Ethan, too, felt the pull, the undeniable magnetism of their closeness, the warmth of Lena's presence and the comfort of her understanding, emotions he had never anticipated experiencing. and he struggled to reconcile his own feelings with the awareness that what he was feeling was complicated, intense, and perhaps forbidden, yet impossible to ignore. And as they sat together, the silence between them stretched, filled with the subtle noises of the evening, the faint ticking of the clock, the distant hum of traffic outside, the occasional rustle of fabric as Ethan shifted nervously, and each sound seemed amplified, a soundtrack to their unspoken confessions, each pause a deliberate space for thought, for reflection, for the hesitant testing of boundaries. And Lena's mind raced as she thought of the last time she had felt this vulnerable, this exposed, this acutely aware of the fragile thread that could connect two hearts in a single instant, and she realized with both fear and wonder that this connection had been forming quietly for months, unnoticed until now, manifesting in fleeting glances, lingering touches, and the small, intimate moments of shared laughter and mutual understanding that had gone unnoticed but now felt significant, monumental even. And Ethan, sensing her thoughts through the intensity of her gaze, felt an internal pull, a mixture of comfort and longing that made it almost impossible to sit still, as if his body and heart were conspiring to bridge the emotional distance between them. And he leaned slightly forward, hesitant but curious, drawn by the gravity of her presence, by the quiet assurance in her eyes that he could trust her, that she could understand the complexity of his emotions without judgment. And as he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper, admitting the loneliness he had felt, the nights spent wrestling with thoughts he couldn't share, Lena felt a deep surge of compassion, a motherly instinct mingled with the inexplicable awareness of desire, of a heart drawn toward another in a way that transcended simple affection. And when she responded, her words gentle, soft, and unhurried, offering understanding, validation, and a safe space, Ethan's shoulders relaxed slightly, his tense posture easing, yet the charged energy between them did not dissipate, instead thickening, becoming a palpable presence, a mixture of relief, connection, and unspoken longing. And as the evening stretched on, they found themselves sharing memories, confessions, and small truths that had been locked away in their hearts, laughter mingling with sighs, quiet smiles punctuating moments of mutual recognition, each revelation peeling away layers of guardedness, each shared glance an acknowledgement of the subtle intimacy forming between them. And in these moments, the boundaries of stepmother and stepson blurred, replaced by a fragile, emotional closeness that felt both thrilling and terrifying, for neither could deny the intensity of the emotions they were feeling, emotions that were tender, human, and deeply resonant. And as Lena brushed a loose strand of hair from Ethan's forehead again, more intentionally this time, she noticed the slight shiver that ran through him, a reaction that mirrored the fluttering in her own chest. And for a moment, the room seemed to exist outside of time, a sacred space where the weight of their feelings could be felt fully, without interruption, without judgment, where the connection they shared could exist in its purest, most honest form. And yet, even as they navigated this uncharted emotional terrain, there was a subtle awareness of the outside world, of the expectations, the roles, the societal boundaries that hovered like shadows just beyond the glow of the room, reminding them both that while the night held these precious moments, reality would demand its return. Yet neither wanted to break the spell, neither wanted to lose this delicate thread that tied them together in ways they were only beginning to comprehend. And as Ethan's hand twitched slightly, the urge to reach out, to linger, to explore this emotional closeness more fully, Lena's heart responded with a mix of hope, hesitation, and a deep, almost aching empathy, a desire to be near, to understand, to comfort, and to share this quiet intimacy that neither had anticipated. And when Ethan's eyes met hers once more, searching, questioning, uncertain, Lena felt an unspoken understanding pass between them, a silent acknowledgement of the storm of feelings they were both experiencing. And as the room fell into another soft silence, filled only with the distant murmurs of the city and the quiet rhythm of their shared breaths, it became clear that this unexpected moment had opened a doorway to emotions that were tender, powerful, and impossible to ignore, a doorway that neither could close. And as they sat together, suspended in this fragile space of connection, Lena realized that the night had already changed something fundamental, something deep within her. And Ethan, feeling the same, sensed that nothing between them would ever be quite the same again, that the vulnerability, the warmth, and the quiet intimacy they had shared would linger, subtly shaping the contours of their relationship in ways neither could yet fully name. and as the evening slowly gave way to night, the soft glow of the lamps casting gentle shadows across the room, they both understood, without saying a word, that this night, this conversation, this simple act of opening up and sharing feelings, had created a bond that was fragile, electric, and unforgettable, a bond that would pull at them in quiet, unexpected ways. And as Lena watched Ethan rise reluctantly to leave, she felt a mixture of relief, longing, and a soft ache of desire for the connection that had suddenly become impossible to ignore, a connection that promised more moments like this, moments of emotional revelation, tenderness, and the delicate tension of hearts slowly discovering each other. And as Ethan paused at the doorway, glancing back with eyes full of unsaid words, Lena knew that this was only the beginning, that the night had set a course neither could predict, a course filled with vulnerability, longing, and the quiet thrill of a connection that was as dangerous as it was beautiful. And as the door closed softly behind him, the room seemed to hold its breath, carrying the echoes of their conversation, their shared glances, and the fragile promise of something deeper, leaving Lena alone with the memory of the evening, the warmth of the touch she hadn't wanted to end, and the undeniable truth that an unexpected moment had already begun to weave a story of hearts intertwined, emotions awakened, and a journey that would test, challenge, and transform them both in ways they were only beginning to understand. Days passed after that quiet evening, yet Lena could not shake the memory of Ethan's visit, the way his eyes had met hers with a mixture of vulnerability and unspoken longing, and every time she thought of him, her heart fluttered with a strange, confusing warmth that made ordinary moments feel charged with anticipation, a tension that neither comfort nor distraction could entirely dissolve, and she found herself glancing at the door at odd times, half expecting him to appear again, half hoping that the quiet, unspoken connection they had shared would continue to grow in small, secret ways. And Ethan, meanwhile, felt the same magnetic pull toward her, a mixture of admiration, trust, and an unfamiliar, tender longing that made him pause in the hallways, reconsider what he wanted to say, what he could express, and how to navigate feelings that were at once beautiful and complicated. For the awareness of the emotional closeness they shared now colored every interaction, every fleeting glance, every smile that lingered longer than it should, and Lena caught herself thinking of him in quiet moments, feeling a soft ache of longing, a combination of empathy and fascination, wondering how someone so young yet so aware could stir emotions in her she had never expected to feel again. And as the days stretched into another evening, fate seemed to orchestrate their paths toward each other once more, as if the universe had decided to test the boundaries of their connection. For one quiet night, Lena found herself in the living room, the soft hum of the city outside providing a gentle backdrop to her thoughts, when Ethan appeared again, unannounced, his footsteps hesitant, as though he were unsure of what he would find, and yet drawn irresistibly toward the warmth and understanding he had discovered in her presence. And when he entered, the subtle tension returned immediately, palpable, thick, and undeniable, making the room feel smaller, more intimate, a stage set for the quiet unfolding of emotions neither fully understood but both felt acutely. And Lena gestured to the chair beside her, her smile gentle, inviting, a silent signal that he was welcome. And as he sat, their eyes met with that same intensity, that same electric awareness that had lingered since the first unexpected evening, a connection that had grown in subtle, almost imperceptible ways, through shared glances, quiet conversations, and the occasional touch that neither could ignore. And as they spoke, the conversation flowed in ways that surprised them both, moving seamlessly from ordinary topics to deeper, more personal confessions, and each revelation peeled away layers of guardedness, each shared memory or secret offering a bridge toward understanding, toward emotional intimacy that neither had anticipated but both craved. And Lena found herself laughing softly at some of Ethan's observations, her voice light yet carrying an undercurrent of warmth and care, while Ethan, feeling the ease of their connection, responded with gestures of trust. Leaning slightly closer, his body language subtly mirroring hers, and the emotional closeness they shared became increasingly tangible, a living, breathing presence that neither dared to name aloud, yet both felt in every heartbeat, every glance, every subtle movement. And as the evening wore on, Lena noticed the way Ethan's eyes softened when he looked at her, how the tension in his shoulders eased slightly when he laughed at her gentle teasing, and how the room seemed to contract around them, making even ordinary objects, The lamp, the armchair, the books on the table, fade into insignificance compared to the shared space between them, a space charged with unspoken words, shared secrets, and the delicate thrill of a bond forming against expectations, a bond that was tender, emotionally rich, and undeniably magnetic, and Ethan, caught in the same current, felt his chest tighten at the simple awareness of her presence, the way her smile seemed to anchor him, the way her words resonated in ways that went far beyond the surface, making him acutely aware of the fragile, emotional thread that connected them, and he realized that every glance, every small interaction since that first night had carried a weight he hadn't fully understood until now, a subtle emotional gravity that drew him to her again and again, even as propriety whispered caution. And Lena, feeling this same pull, felt her own heartbeat quicken at the awareness that she was just as captivated, just as drawn to him, in ways that were complicated, beautiful, and frightening all at once, and as the night deepened, they found themselves sharing more than words, moments of silence stretching comfortably, allowing each of them to process the intensity of feelings that had begun to bloom in secret, a silent communion of hearts and minds that neither could fully articulate, and yet the unspoken tension remained, an electric undercurrent that made the air between them feel alive, vibrant, and dangerous in its tenderness, and Lena, aware of the delicate balance, felt a mix of exhilaration and fear, knowing that what they shared was profound yet fragile, and Ethan, sensing the same, shifted slightly closer, not daring to overstep, yet unable to resist the subtle pull of proximity, and when their hands accidentally brushed while reaching for the same book, both flinched momentarily but held the contact just long enough to acknowledge it, the fleeting touch carrying more meaning than either had intended, a silent affirmation of connection, a spark that neither wanted to extinguish, and as they pulled their hands back, both felt the warmth linger, a quiet reminder that emotions had shifted, had deepened, and that the simple moments of shared presence now carried weight, emotional resonance, and the soft thrill of discovery. And as Lena spoke, her voice gentle and understanding, she noticed how attentively Ethan listened, how the corners of his eyes softened, how the faint tension in his brow eased as if her words were an anchor, a balm to the complicated feelings that had surged unexpectedly in his heart. And as the evening progressed, the outside world faded, leaving only the dimly lit room, the quiet hum of the night, and the two of them suspended in a fragile, electric intimacy that was emotional, tender, and dangerously captivating. And Lena realized with a mixture of awe and fear that the line between stepmother and stepson had blurred, replaced by a bond that was complex, human, and deeply affecting, while Ethan felt the same, a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and an almost irresistible attraction that he could neither name nor fully resist. And as the clock ticked toward the late hours, they found themselves talking about hopes, regrets, fears, and dreams, revealing pieces of themselves that neither had shared before, each confession a thread in the tapestry of connection weaving between them, and each shared smile, laugh, and sigh deepened the emotional intensity, making every moment charged with significance, every gesture meaningful, and every glance a small spark of understanding and longing. And as the night drew toward its end, neither wanted to break the spell, neither wanted to leave the fragile sanctuary of emotional closeness they had created, and yet reality called, gently reminding them that the world outside would soon demand their attention. Yet even as they rose to part for the night, the awareness of what had been shared, of the connection that had been formed, lingered like a soft ache, a subtle, persistent warmth in their hearts that neither could deny. And as Ethan paused at the doorway, their eyes meeting in a long, lingering gaze, words were unnecessary, for the unspoken understanding between them carried the weight of everything: trust, longing, vulnerability, and the quiet thrill of emotions that had been awakened and could not be ignored. And when he finally stepped into the hallway, closing the door softly behind him, Lena sank back into the chair, her chest tight with hope, fear, and longing, knowing that the night had changed something irrevocably, that the emotional thread between them was now permanent, delicate, but unbreakable. And as she stared at the soft glow of the lamp and the shadows it cast, she understood that this connection, unexpected and profound, would continue to shape their days, their thoughts, and their hearts, for the bond they had forged in silence, in vulnerability, in shared attention, was no longer just a fleeting moment, but the beginning of a story, a journey of hearts learning to navigate tenderness, longing, and the quiet thrill of emotions neither could fully control. And as The world outside remained oblivious. Lena and Ethan carried within them the memory of a night where everything had shifted, where subtle touches, shared laughter, and the depth of unspoken words had created an intimacy that was emotional, romantic, and unforgettable, a delicate spark that promised to guide the next chapters of their lives, quietly, profoundly, and beautifully. The days following that evening felt heavier, charged with an almost unbearable tension, a quiet anticipation that neither Lena nor Ethan could fully ignore, as if every glance, every passing moment, and every shared smile carried hidden weight, and the memory of their conversations, the accidental touches, and the unspoken understanding lingered between them, shaping their thoughts and emotions in ways neither had expected, and Lena found herself constantly replaying the evening in her mind, remembering the subtle tremor of his hand as they reached for the same book, the way his eyes had softened when she spoke gently, the warmth in the room that had seemed to wrap around them both like an invisible cocoon, and she realized, with a mixture of excitement and fear, that what had begun as a simple, unexpected moment had transformed into a bond that was deeply affecting, a connection that stirred emotions she had tried to ignore but could no longer suppress, and Ethan, too, carried the memory of that night like a quiet pulse in his chest, feeling the pull of her presence, the comfort of her understanding, and the strange, tender longing that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day, making him acutely aware of the delicate balance they were navigating, the fine line between familiarity and something deeper, more complex, and more emotionally consuming than either had anticipated. And on a quiet evening, when the world outside had softened into muted shadows and the city hummed gently in the distance, fate orchestrated another meeting, unplanned yet inevitable, as Ethan appeared at Lena's doorway once more, hesitant yet drawn irresistibly, and Lena's heart leapt at the sight of him, her chest tightening with anticipation, her pulse quickening as she welcomed him into the room with a gentle smile, a simple gesture that carried the weight of every unspoken feeling that had accumulated over the past days, and as he stepped inside, the air seemed to thrum with energy, subtle yet undeniable, a quiet electricity that neither dared name, yet both felt in every glance, every shift of posture, every unintentional brush of fingers, and when he settled into the chair across from her, their eyes met, long and steady, speaking in a language that words could not capture, a language of longing, understanding, and fragile connection, and Lena noticed the small ways in which he had changed since that first evening, the way his shoulders carried less tension, yet the vulnerability in his gaze remained, a reminder of the trust and openness that had begun to grow between them, and Ethan, observing her, felt the same mix of admiration, comfort, and longing, noticing the subtle curve of her smile, the gentle softness in her eyes, the calm warmth of her presence, all of which made his chest tighten with feelings he could barely articulate, and as they spoke, their conversation flowed naturally, moving from light-hearted remarks to deeper reflections on life, hope, and fear, each sentence a bridge over the invisible distance that had existed before, each confession a thread weaving them closer, and when Ethan hesitated, his voice low, admitting that he often felt invisible, that he longed to be understood, Lena reached out instinctively, placing a hand on his arm, a gesture so simple yet so loaded with emotion that it made both of them pause, feeling the quiet power of human connection, the comfort of touch, and the thrill of unspoken understanding, and Ethan, noticing the warmth, felt an unexpected rush of gratitude and longing, the kind that makes hearts race and thoughts stumble, as he realized that the presence of someone who truly listened, truly cared, could stir emotions deeper than he had ever known, and Lena, equally aware, felt the stirrings of desire mixed with empathy, a blend of maternal care and human attraction that was confusing yet undeniable, and as the evening deepened, the room seemed to contract, the world outside fading, leaving only the dim glow of the lamp, the soft shadows on the walls, and the two of them suspended in a fragile, electric intimacy, where every small movement, every shift of gaze, and every pause carried meaning, significance, and the quiet thrill of emotions that were newly discovered, and when their hands accidentally brushed again while reaching for a book, neither pulled away, both feeling the lingering warmth, the subtle acknowledgement of connection that spoke louder than any words could, and as they sat in that tension-filled silence, Lena realized that the unspoken bond between them had grown stronger, an invisible thread tying their hearts together in a way that was tender, delicate, and profoundly affecting, and Ethan felt the same, acutely aware of the emotional gravity that now existed in every shared glance, every soft laugh, and every intimate pause, and as Lena spoke, her words gentle, validating, and understanding, Ethan's shoulders relaxed slightly, his chest easing as if the simple act of being heard, being seen, and being understood could lift the weight he had carried alone for so long, and in that quiet, they shared a rare moment of pure human connection, fragile yet electric, filled with longing, empathy, and the complicated beauty of emotional intimacy, and Lena, noticing the subtle shifts in Ethan's expressions, the softening of his eyes, the quiet catch in his breath, the tremor of his fingers, felt an ache of longing, a mixture of exhilaration and fear, understanding that the feelings growing between them were potent and undeniable, yet delicate, requiring careful navigation, and Ethan, sensing the same, leaned just slightly closer, aware of the pull between them, the invisible gravity that made it impossible to simply remain indifferent, and as the night continued, they spoke of dreams, regrets, and hopes, revealing pieces of themselves that had been hidden, each revelation deepening the emotional resonance, creating a tapestry of shared understanding, trust, and subtle longing, and when the soft knock at the door came, startling them both, it was a reminder of the outside world, of responsibilities and expectations that demanded attention, yet the moment had already changed them, the connection forged too strong to ignore, lingering in the air like a quiet promise, a memory they would carry, shaping the way they felt, the way they looked at each other, and the way every future interaction would be colored by this delicate, emotional intimacy, and as Ethan prepared to leave, both of them felt the ache of parting, the bittersweet pull of hearts drawn together yet constrained by circumstance, and their eyes met in a long, lingering gaze, heavy with unspoken words, the silent language of longing, understanding, and recognition that carried all the weight of their shared moments, and when Ethan finally stepped into the hallway, closing the door gently behind him, Lena sank back into the chair, her chest tight with the mingling of relief, hope, and quiet desire, knowing that the bond they had formed could not be undone, that the tender, emotional connection was permanent, delicate yet indelible, and as she stared into the dimly lit room, shadows dancing softly on the walls, she understood that this night, this moment, had set the stage for a future filled with emotional exploration, the thrill of discovery, and the quiet, profound beauty of a connection that neither time nor circumstance could erase, and Ethan, walking down the hallway, felt the same, a mixture of longing, awe, and excitement for what lay ahead, aware that this unexpected intimacy, built on trust, vulnerability, and subtle yearning, had created a story that would continue to unfold, shaping their hearts and lives in ways neither had anticipated, and as the night deepened and the city outside carried on in its quiet rhythm, both Lena and Ethan held within them the memory of a moment that was tender, electric, and unforgettable, a moment that had changed everything, a moment that promised a journey of emotional depth, romance, and discovery, delicate and profound, a journey neither could have predicted but both now quietly longed to explore, together yet cautiously, aware of the fragile, powerful bond that had formed in the quiet intimacy of a single, unexpected evening that would forever linger in their hearts.